Everybody, and welcome. Apologies for the delay, but we're certainly glad that you are able to join. My name is Chloe, and I am part of the APP Training and Technical Assistance team with RTI. I'm happy to introduce this webinar today entitled Spreading the Word About Your Program, Applying Strategies from Contagious. And today's presenter is Dr. Jonah Berger from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And many of you here today attended the topical training back in February, and so we're delighted to have you back for part 2. And for those of you who were unable to attend, this presentation will also include a brief overview of what was discussed. So before we get into the presentation, we just have a couple of logistics to go over. So just be mindful that you are muted throughout the presentation. You can also just check your computer audio volume and enable speaker if you do have trouble hearing. We also have Cameron Johnson, a colleague of ours who can help with any technical issues that you might have. If you do feel comfortable and are able, we would love for you to share your video as well. And then throughout the presentation, if you have questions or comments, or even at the end, if you're unable to unmute, please feel free to use the chat box to enter in any comments that you might have. And some objectives. So by the end of this webinar, we are hoping that you all will be able to do the following. So describe 6 steps for amplifying messaging for the programs. Identify tools that support application of the contagious strategies in your work, and identify at least one next step that you can take to increase awareness of your programs. All right, and we have a brief poll. Cameron, do we have that ready? And the question is, have you tried something new that you learned from the topical training presentation on this topic? So just take a second and answer yes, no, not sure, or didn't attend the training. Give it a few more seconds. All right. Okay, so for those of you who did attend the training, it looks like a number of you were able to try something new that you had learned. And for those of you who haven't yet, maybe this presentation will also give you an opportunity to try some new strategies. All right, thanks, Cameron. All right, so without further ado, I think I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will hand it over to Jonah to get us started.
Fantastic. It says the host has disabled screen sharing, so can someone set it up so I can share? Thank you.
There you are, sir.
Appreciate it. All right, so thank you guys for coming today. And it seems like a good chunk of you was not, were not able to make the last session, which is no problem at all. I will try to give you an overview of a little bit of what was covered in that session, though to be honest, there's not gonna be time today to go into depth. So I'll briefly touch on some things, but direct you to some free online resources in case they're available. One of the big ideas we talked about last time was this. And I know it doesn't seem like a big idea, and I know it seems like an obvious question, but when we think, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. If you guys could mute your line, thank you. When we think about pitching ideas, programs, initiatives, content, we think a lot about how good that content is. And indeed, it is great content. But the challenge is that if we don't understand what our audience finds tasty, what resonates with them, the way they're built, it's going to be difficult to become successful, right? We all know that we should eat more broccoli, and yet cheeseburgers are just so delicious, right? We end up picking them even when we should end up picking the broccoli. And so the goal of the broccoli is not to become a cheeseburger, but the goal of the good, delicious, nutritious broccoli is to say, great, what do people find tasty, and how can I cook broccoli just a little bit of a different way to make it resonate better with the audiences that we're going after? And so we talked a little about how we could make our messaging tastier, how we could better frame our outreach and engagement material, and how we can use word of mouth to help teens learn about our programs. One of the big things we talked about during that meeting is the value of word of mouth, right? Even in cases where programs are free, even when we're nonprofits, information that comes from peers is much more impactful than information that comes from organizations. People trust their peers much more than they trust organizations. Everyone says that their content is great, their webinars are wonderful, their meetings are fantastic. No one says, oh man, this is going to be really boring. Good luck for the next 50 minutes, right? Everyone says their stuff is great. But the challenge then as a listener is, well, no one knows if it's actually going to be good. And so we turn to peers or people that we know to help us in these decisions. We turn to other people that have had these experiences to know what to do. And so in that last session, I briefly introduced my book, Contagious, which is all about why things catch on, why people talk about and share products and services and initiatives and programs, why we talk about some things rather than others. It's not just that the things themselves have to be the most exciting, surprising things. You might say, well, people talk more about Kim Kardashian than they do about climate policy. How can I get people to talk about programs and take their attention away from sports and other sorts of things? But virality isn't born, it's made. If we understand why people talk and share, we can get people to talk about or share anything, right? I talked last time about the fact that a blender company got millions of people to share videos about blenders, not the most exciting category. I talked about how an insurance ad was one of the most shared ads from a couple of years ago. Again, I challenge you to argue that insurance is the most exciting category that's out there. And so we can get people to talk about and share things if we understand why they share in the first place. And so in that last meeting, I mentioned the framework from the book, which is called the STEPS framework. And STEPS stand for the 6 key drivers of why people talk and share: social currency, triggers, emotion, public, practical value, and stories. Each of these is a psychological driver of why people talk, why they share, and leads all sorts of stuff to catch on. And so what I did in that session is I introduced a few of the steps, and we talked about how we could apply them to the programs that you guys work on. And so what I'll do today is I'll give a very, very brief, basically one slide, no examples, no depth. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to go into all of them, but a brief summary of what the folks saw last time. And then we'll talk more about the steps that we didn't cover last time and how you might be able to apply them. And again, no problem if you didn't catch the last workshop. Feel free, if you go to my website, jonahberger.com, there's a resource tab, a bunch of free resources there about what the steps are, how to apply them, and how to get stuff to catch on. So feel free to check those out. So just to briefly cover the steps, or briefly recover the steps, or touch on the steps that we talked about last time, the idea of social currency is the better something makes people look, the more likely they are to talk about it and share it. Right? We talk about the times that good things happen to us, that, we finally, maybe 2 months from now, we go back on vacation. We talk about getting promoted. We talk about something good that happens to our kids. We don't talk about the bad stuff that happens to us. We don't talk about the boring, unexciting stuff that happens to us. And so that said, we can leverage that insight to get people to talk about and share our programs. We're so focused on the programs themselves and telling people why they're great. Instead, we should think about, well, what will make the people that hear our message look good? Because the better we can make them look, the more likely they'll tell someone else about the program. And so we talked about the idea of making people feel like insiders, right? How we can make them feel smart, feel special, feel in the know, like they're not like everyone else. And because they feel special, they'll tell others. Right, the idea of making certain individuals, you can think about in neighborhoods like block captains, or you can think about them as school or region captains, but making them feel like they're in charge, that they have some freedom and autonomy, that they're important, will make them want to share with others. Similarly, rather than making something all access, for example, maybe making it limited. Scarce. Only the first X number of people that sign up get access to this. Well, the more it feels like something is scarce, the more desirable it is, the more I want it. And so the more likely I am to sign up, and the more likely I am to tell others that I signed up for this thing. So making people look good encourages them to talk and to share. Another principle that we talked about, the second principle in the framework, was the idea of triggers, or top of mind, tip of tongue. right? The more we're thinking about something, the more likely we are to talk about it. Why do we talk so much about the weather? Or why, before, at least pre-COVID, did we talk so much about where we went for lunch in the afternoon at work? Because those things are top of mind. The more we're thinking about something, the more likely we are to talk about it, right? If I say peanut butter and, you probably think of the word jelly, right? If I said milk and, you'd probably think of the word cookies, right? These things are paired together in our mind, and so thinking about one thing can remind us of something else. What that means, though, is we want to make sure to link our programs to things in the environment, right? The more that those things come up, related things come up, it can encourage people to think about us. And so we talked about the 4 key questions to ask when we think about triggers. Who do we want to be triggered? When do we want them to think about us? What is around at that time? And how can we create a link to that thing? Kit Kat, the candy bar, for example, link themselves to coffee. Having a coffee break, have a Kit Kat. Think about coffee, think about Kit Kat. Coffee and Kit Kat and coffee, best friends forever. By linking themselves to something in the environment that people do a lot, every time they drank coffee, it encouraged them to think about Kit Kat. Right? How can we make sure when people are having difficult conversations about pregnancy, or they see their friends going through a difficult time, how can we make sure that those things trigger people to think about us and our programs? Top of mind, more likely to be tip of tongue. We talked also about stories. And the key insight from stories was people don't share information, they tell stories. They tell narratives. Information travels under the guise of idle chatter. But not all stories are effective, right? People often tell great stories, but if they don't mention us, it's not going to be very helpful. And so what we need to do is build what are called Trojan horse stories, right? Vessels are carriers of information that carry a kernel, a brand, a key attribute, a message, an idea, an organization, a program along for the ride, right? Make a story that shows rather than tells why our programs are so great. I'll give you an example in a very different context, but there's an old story about a department store called Nordstrom's. You guys might remember Nordstrom's, or still might remember Nordstrom, but it's a store that's known for great customer service. And a story that people would tell is they'd say, look, someone went to Nordstrom's and they were upset. They said, look, I bought these snow tires and they didn't work and I want my money back. And so the person at Nordstrom said, fine, no problem. I'll give you your money back. And that's not surprising. But what's noteworthy about that story is that Nordstrom's doesn't sell snow tires, right? But they care so much about customer service that they cared about the value of this customer that even though they didn't sell them that thing, they refunded them the money because they care about the customer. That shows rather than tells the idea. How can you show rather than tell the value of your programs? Anyone can say you're going to learn a lot. How can you show them that, right? You can even asking questions that they don't know the answer to show them that they can learn some of these things as part of them. Okay, so that's social currency, triggers, and stories. What I'm going to do with the rest of the time we have together is to dive into the other steps that we didn't cover last week. And I'm sorry, this was like a whirlwind tour of the first steps. There's lots more details about how to apply these ideas and examples to help you understand them in the book and in the resources. But here we'll spend more time on the steps that we didn't cover. And so to do that, I want to start by talking about emotion. And the key idea of emotion is when we care, we share. The more emotionally attached we are to something, the more likely we are to pass it on. And so to explain this idea, I want to tell you, did you guys take the animation out of the slides?
I don't think so.
Yeah, this was animated in the deck I sent you guys. Okay, well, that gives away some of the punchlines, but I'll work with what we have here. So I was going to tell you a story about a dog named Ruby. So a number of years ago, I was bicycling in Northeast Philadelphia. It was a sort of winter afternoon, cold day. I was biking along when I see this very cute dog running in circles in a parking lot. At the time, I didn't have a dog, but loved dogs, and was always, happy to see a dog. But then I noticed there was no cars in the parking lot, and I noticed that it looked like the dog was lost. Right? Maybe someone had lost their dog. So I put the brakes on my bike. Walk over, dog is very happy, sort of jumping up and down. Then I noticed the dog doesn't have a collar on. There are sores on the side of its body. Essentially, someone has left this dog in the park to fend for itself. Now, I called my local animal shelter. I said, hey guys, I found this dog. Can you find it a good home? They said, sorry, we're full at the moment. I said, well, what does that mean? They said, well, unfortunately, we don't have any space for the dog. We might have to kill the dog. And I said, I'm not going to let you take this dog to kill it. So with the help of a friend, I snuck it into their apartment, gave it some food, gave it a bunch of baths, this flea medicine, sort of nursed it back to health. But as the days went by, and they weren't allowed to have dogs in their apartment, we needed to find a home for this dog. I also lived in a place where they could not have dogs. And so we needed to find somebody to adopt this dog. So I remember sending out an email to all my colleagues saying, hey, free dog. Got its shots, it's ready to go, come pick it up. Now, the good news is that somebody adopted this dog. But it wasn't someone that I emailed, and it wasn't someone that someone who got the email forwarded the email to. It was another degree of separation. I sent the email to someone who sent it to someone else who sent it to yet another person. Why did so many people share this email? And would people have been likely to share this email, same note, for example, if it was about a similar but different thing? Imagine I sent a note saying, hey, I'm moving this weekend. I've got a free couch. It's got its shots. It's ready to go. Come pick it up. Right? If I took a show of hands, most of you would probably share the dog email, and most of you probably would not share the couch email. And the reason why is that when we care, we share. The more emotionally connected we are to something, the more we care about something, the more likely we are to pass it on, right? The more we feel like it's something we're connected to, the more we share it. And I think this is important to remember because we often focus a lot on information, right? Because we assume, well, look, good information will move people in the right direction. But it's not just about good information. In fact, sometimes we focus so much on information that we don't think about what really is likely to move people and drive them to action. And so let me see here. I think you guys inserted this video, so give me 1 second. This is not my usual video, so give me just a second here. I want to make sure I can play this. Great. I'm going to click sound on Zoom. We should be good to go. And let's see if this works.
We're never alone. And that is our strength. Because when we're doubted, we'll play as one. When we're held back, we'll go farther and harder. If we're not taken seriously, we'll prove that wrong. And if we don't fit the sport, we'll change the sport. We know things won't always go our way.
And the world's sporting events are postponed or cancelled.
But whatever it is, we'll find a way. And when things aren't fair, we'll come together for change.
We have a responsibility
to make this world a better place.
And no matter how bad it gets, we will always come back stronger. Because nothing can stop what we can do together.
Guys, so just give me 1 second here. I'm going to get back to the regular sharing. Great. And so, sorry, this was, usually I use an example from Google here, but I think you guys asked for the Nike example. So what does this example show? Well, too often we focus on information. Notice what Nike, though, didn't do. They didn't talk about information, right? They didn't talk about this is what the shoes do, and this is why the clothes wick away sweat, and all these different things. They focused on the power of sport and the emotion associated with it. And so one way to get to that more emotional core, to make sure what we're focused on, is to ask what I'll call the 3 whys. And apologies, this example I think was about Google, because that's what I'd written about before, but someone changed it to Nike. So why does someone use Nike, for example? Why does someone someone buy stuff from Nike? And I think the easy example is, okay, well, they buy stuff from Nike because they want to run, their run to be easier. They want their sweat to be wicked away and all that. Okay, why do they care about that? Well, they care about that because they want exercise to be easier. Why do they care about exercise being easier? Because exercise makes them feel good, because it's a way they connect with their peers, because it's a way they think about achieving and becoming a better version of themselves. Asking why a few times helps get to a much more emotional core. Rather than focusing on the functional reasons why someone do something, asking these why questions get us to a more emotional reason. And so, yeah, again, this was supposed to be animated, so sorry, it's a little bit harder to walk through. But applying this to our audience, why does someone come to our programs? Well, maybe because their friends said it was fun. Well, why do they care about their friends say? Because they want to be accepted by their friends. Why do they care about being accepted by their friends? Because they want to feel connected and part of the group. And so the more we think about our programs, not just as providing information, but the feelings associated with those things, we can think about better messaging and designing better messaging that will resonate more with our audience. And I think if you take away one thing from today, it's that, right? It's very easy to be focused on ourselves. It's very easy to be focused on, I have this great program, I want to make sure people get it. But the more I think about them, and the more I think about, well, why are they interested in this or not, the more I take their perspective, the more likely I'm going to be to move them in the right direction. Now you could say, well, hold on, are all emotions likely to be shared, or some emotions more likely to be shared than others? Yeah, sorry, again, it looks like there's no animation in here. So it's going to be a little bit harder than usual, but I'll roll with it. So we clearly share things when we feel positively, right? We get promoted, we get good news, we want to tell everyone about it, but it's not just positive things, right? We also share negative things. When we're frustrated, for example, we seem to not be able to stop telling others. And so do all emotions increase sharing, or some likely to increase sharing more than others? And so we did a study with the New York Times a few years ago where we looked at how emotions shape sharing. So how the emotions evoked by content shaped whether or not people shared that content. And actually, since we don't have on animation, let me go ahead and annotate here. Maybe this will be a way to solve what would usually be a little easier. Let me see if this works. Let me try drawing. Let me see if I can do that. This work? Nope, that didn't work. Give me a second here. Okay, maybe that's not going to work. Okay, well, we'll skip that. So if you focus on the bottom bar, and sorry, this was animated in that version I would usually use. Focus on the bottom bar. More emotional stuff is more likely to be shared. So the more emotional content makes people, the more likely they are to pass it on. But sad content is actually less likely to be shared. It's not any emotion that causes people to share. Sadness actually decreases sharing. And you could say, okay, well, that's interesting. Maybe all negative emotions decrease sharing. Maybe anything that makes people feel bad discourages them from sharing. But we also looked at anger and anxiety, right? And anger and anxiety actually increased sharing while sadness decreased it. And so if it was just that feeling negative made people less likely to share, anger, anxiety, and sadness should all look the same, yet they don't, right? Anger and anxiety increase sharing, even though sadness decreases it. And so take a moment, take a look at this picture, take a moment, and maybe in the chat, write down why you think anger, anxiety, and sadness might differ. Why might, while sadness decreases sharing, anger and anxiety increase sharing? Take a quick second and write down some thoughts in the chat if you have them. Why might, while sadness decreases sharing, anger and anxiety increase it?
Jonah, I have the deck with the animation. I'm not sure what happened, but if you want me to share it, I'm happy to do that.
But then I can't click through it.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, unless I can get it to you somehow. But...
Okay. Andrew said because we want people to be as angry and anxiety with us. Sense of doing something and fixing the issue. Emotions equal energy and motion. Interesting ideas. Sadness is judgment. Any other thoughts? I want to stick on the couple comments people made. Someone said emotions equal energy and motion. And someone said the sense of doing something to fix an issue, or in some sense taking an action, right? Well, and you could say, well, hold on, right? Well, why isn't sadness doing that? But if you think about it, anger, anxiety, and sadness actually differ on this notion of energy, right? So usually when people think about emotions, they think about them in terms of positive and negative, right? So positive emotions are things like excitement and humor and inspiration and surprise and contentment. And negative emotions are things like anger, anxiety, some types of surprise, and sadness. But in addition to emotions being positive and negative, emotions also differ on another dimension. And that is whether they're activating or they're deactivating, right? Similar to what someone said, right? Some emotions fire us up and some emotions calm us down, right? Think about being excited or angry. You want to do something. Think about when your team wins, you're so excited, you jump up and down for joy. When you're angry about something, you want to yell at someone or throw something. Think about the difference between that and sadness or contentment, right? When you're sad, you just want to sort of curl up in a ball and do nothing. When you're content, you feel good, but it doesn't really make you want to take action. And so it turns out that not all emotions drive sharing. Arousal activation is what drives sharing, whether positive or negative. Emotions that fire us up for action are more likely to drive us to share. And so I think this is really important, right? First, it suggests that yes, in general, we don't want to make people feel bad, but it's not just about making them feel good, right? Too often I work with organizations say, look, if I just make people feel positive, they'll pass on my message. But if we make them feel contentment isn't a reason to pass something on. And so sometimes it's okay to use negative emotions and deal with the negative feelings people have because they're feeling that already about a problem they might have, for example, and show how that your program, your initiative, your idea will help them solve that anger or that anxiety, for example. Use that motivating force, but as a solution to the problem. And so first, if we're going to be positive, we can't just be positive. We have to be high arousal positive, activating positive. We have to excite them. We have to inspire them about the power of transformation or surprise them in a good way. We can also think about, right, being negative as well, leveraging negative emotions to encourage sharing. And I also love showing this picture because if you think about not the most recent election, but the two elections before that, you think about what Obama ran on and what Trump ran on, very different people running on very different things, but both of them leveraged high arousal emotions, right? Obama leveraged inspiration, hope to say hope for change. Trump, on the other hand, used more sort of anger and anxiety to scare people into taking action. And I don't want to take sides here, so I won't. But both of them are examples of high arousal emotions, right? Of using high arousal emotions to motivate action. Giving people information is a great way to inform them, but it won't necessarily drive action. Emotions are great for driving action. Okay, next I want to turn to public, and then I'll turn to practical value. And I think the hope is that we at least have a couple minutes for breakouts. So I'm going to try to hustle a little bit more through this content so we have some time for at least a quick breakout at some point, and hopefully time for questions at the end. So we'll see where we get. And so the idea of public is a very simple one. And to talk about public, I want to use an example from Apple. And so many of you know that Apple builds its products to be easy to use. They want it to, you don't even need instructions. You just open up the box and it's ready to go. And so the laptop was no exception, right? They put the logo on top of the laptop facing you, the user, so you knew how to use it. You set the laptop down on the table. If the logo is facing you, it was ready to go, right? And so when you take that laptop out of your backpack, you know exactly how to orient it. But a number of years ago, in a marketing meeting, they realized there was a problem, which is while the logo faced the user, and that was great for the user, when the user opened up the laptop, it was upside down for everyone else. Now, you know what laptop you bought. You spent thousands of dollars and weeks of your time buying it, but other people don't know what laptop you bought. And in some cases, you don't care, but the organization cares a lot, right? Because people tend to do what other people are doing, right? People tend to imitate others around them, but they can only imitate what they can see, what they can observe. If you can't see what others are doing, you can't imitate it. And so Apple actually went ahead and flipped the logo, make it upside down for the user, right side up for everyone else, because they realized if something is built to show, it's built to grow, right? Many people may love our programs, but if other people don't know that their friends are in those programs, it's going to be really hard for that information to influence them, right? We tend to look to others. When we tend to try to figure out what to do, we tend to look to other people. What are other people doing? If other people are doing it, it must be a pretty good idea, right? If lots of other people are buying a product or using a service, we follow them. If we're in a foreign city and we don't know what restaurant to try, we often use a time-tested technique. What do? We look for a place that's full. Why? Because if it's full, we assume that it must be good. Do we know sure it's good? No, but we assume if lots of people are doing it, it must be good. But notice, really key there, we can only imitate others if we can see what they're doing, if we can observe what they're doing. If we can't observe it, we can't imitate it. And the challenge there is that many things people do are private. I don't know what causes my next door neighbor supports. I don't know what toothpaste they use. Those things are unobservable, which means I can't use their behavior as a signal of what I should do, right? Think about voting, for example, or get vaccinated. Often, I don't know if somebody voted. I don't know if they're vaccinated. So what organizations do to encourage others to pay attention to what people are doing, they create things like stickers. I voted sticker. I got vaccinated sticker. Now, if I see a lot of people doing it, I'm more likely to do it myself. Right? Same thing includes for programs. For programs, it's not observable to know what program someone went to last week. It's not something I can observe. And if I can't observe it, I can't use it as a signal of information. And so what do we need to do? Well, we need to make the private public. We need to make otherwise unobservable things more observable. Right, so I'll give you a couple examples in a different context, and then I'll bring it back to our context. But just some simple examples. Think about headphones, right? When Apple first came out with iPod, at the time, everyone was using portable CD players, right? And it was a terrible device. It wasn't very good, but that's what everyone was using. Apple came out with this new device called an iPod. It seemed like it might be good, but it was also really expensive. And so people didn't know whether it would be a good idea or not. They were sort of stuck in this balance. Should I do it or not? And so Apple, though, made their headphones white. Before, all the headphones were black. It was hard to see. Apple make their headphones white, make it easier to see, easier to imitate, right? Being able to see what others are doing, right, makes it able to use that as a signal of it yourself, and helps you go, well, lots of others are doing it. It must be pretty good. The first time I see those white headphones, I don't know if they're good or not, but that's interesting. The second time, the fifth time, the 10th time, if I see lots of people doing it, I'm more likely to do it myself, right? But it's not just that happens for products. Same goes with information. Right. So in the UK a few years ago, not enough people were paying their taxes on time. Most people were paying their taxes on time, but not everyone was doing it. And so they sent out all these emails and letters saying, hey, pay your taxes, pay your taxes. And they weren't netting the outcomes they'd hoped. And so instead, they tried leveraging this principle of making the private public. They added one sentence to the letter, right? And it increased the number of people paying their taxes on time by 30%. And that sentence was 9 out of 10 people in Britain pay their taxes on time. Often, many people might like something or do something, but if it's unobservable, I can't use that thing as a signal of information. But by making it more observable, right, it makes it easier to see and easier to imitate. And you can think about the same idea in situations of a broad range of types, right? Think about the challenge with mental health. Right? It's not always observable if someone is depressed or has some other sort of problem. And so folks think they're the only one. I'm the only one that has this problem. And if I'm the only one, I don't want to tell other people I have it. And so nobody talks about it, even though lots of people have this issue, right? This is an example of what psychologists would call pluralistic ignorance, right? It's a complicated term, I know, but it's basically the plural, the audience, the set of people, the community is ignorant of the norms of the community. So examples, famous examples of this are binge drinking in college. Why do people binge drink in college? Well, one reason is they think everyone else binge drinks, right? Many people in college, it turns out, aren't comfortable with binge drinking. They think it's a bad idea and they don't want to do it, but they think they're the only one. They think they're the only person that feels that way. And so they binge drink because they think that's what other people want to do. And so everyone ends up binge drinking, even though they don't want to do it. But notice the key aspect of public there, right? Because drinking is public, but beliefs are not. People can observe others drinking, but they can't observe people feeling uncomfortable about drinking because it's not visible, right? And so we need to make the invisible visible. Let's say most ninth graders haven't had sex, for example, right? That may be true, but if not everyone knows that, they may think that everyone's doing it. Why? Because maybe everybody's talking about it or people are bragging about it or whatever it might be because they want a posture. And so making them more aware of the norm makes them feel more comfortable doing what they wanted to do in the first place. But notice the subtle difference between these two things on the screen in front of you. So they both, in some sense, convey the same information, right? 8 of 10 ninth graders have never had sex. Well, the other one says most ninth graders have never had sex. Anyone have any sense of which of these might be more effective and why? Or whether we might want to be more careful about one of them or the other and why? Throw a comment in the chat if you have a thought. Which of these might we want to be careful about and why? Lori said 8 out of 10. Lori, you want to unmute yourself for a second and say why we should be careful about 8 out of 10?
I typed it in too fast.
Ah.
I was, if I would have listened to the last part of your question, I probably would have said most great. I don't know. 8 out of 10 says, wow, 80% of these kids haven't even had sex.
Good. What else does it say though? 8 out of 10.
That 2 of the 10
Yes.
have had it.
And this is what we need to be really careful about, right? Information that conveys norms can have unintended effects, right? When we say 8 out of 10 people have never had sex, we are making clear that 2 out of 10 have, right? We are reminding people that some set of people have. On the other hand, when I say most, it doesn't do as much work to remind us of the people that haven't. And we need to be really careful about these things, right? There's some very nice research that shows that when you tell people that other people are doing stuff, even if very few people are doing it, it can make them more likely to do it. So there's a famous study, for example, at national parks where they tell people, hey, don't take home souvenirs from national parks because so many people have taken home souvenirs and it's ruined the park. People go, oh, wow, other people are taking home souvenirs. Maybe I should do it myself. There's even some research showing that anti-drug campaigns can backfire because the previous versions of them said, hey, the cool kids are going to ask you to take drugs and you should say no. But what those campaigns both do is they say, don't do drugs, but they also say the cool kids are going to ask you to do it. And so it reminds you that other people are doing it. And so we need to be really careful about how we use information that conveys norms, right? Be careful of suggesting something that we don't intend to suggest, because if people think others are doing it, they're going to be more likely to do it. Let me talk about practical value, and then I think we'll have at least a couple minutes to break out and discuss these ideas. Practical value is, I think, the most intuitive of the 6 steps. Essentially, at the core, it's news you can use or sort of useful information. But to talk about the power of this, I want to introduce you to this guy. This is not going to be animated, so I'm not going to be able to introduce you to him. Okay, so this is hard. Sorry, there's a guy behind this, and I was going to reveal him by removing the black panes on top and the bottom, but I can't do that. So I'm just going to tell you about him. So there's a guy named Ken Craig. He made a viral video. That by itself is not surprising. There are many people who've made viral videos, but this guy is 86 years old. Not many 86 years old folks make viral videos. And the thing he made a viral video about is corn. Shucking corn. Now you would think nobody cares about shucking corn. How does someone make a 10 million view video about shucking corn? Well, Ken has a trick for eating corn. I interviewed him. He's an amazing trick. I called him up. I said, hey, Ken, how long have you been eating corn? He said, I'm 86 years old. I've been eating corn my entire life. There are 2 problems with corn. First, it gets stuck in your teeth. Ken can't solve that problem. But the second problem is those annoying things on the side that you can never get rid of, right? You take out the husk of the corn, but inside of those silks, you can never seem to get rid of them all. Well, Ken has a trick for getting rid of silks. You take an ear of corn, you chuck it in the microwave for about 2 minutes, pop it out, cut off a bottom 1/4 inch, hold the husk, out drops the ears, clean ears every time. Now, this video is not extremely remarkable. It's not that surprising. It's not triggered by the environment. It's not that public. It's not that emotional. But what it is clearly useful. This is pure practical value, right? Summer's coming up, corn season coming up. This is useful information. Wow, this is a trick, a helpful trick. I might share this with someone else who I know likes corn. People often share useful information with others. If you want to think about, for example, Black Friday deals, discounts off, people share it to help save their peers money. Top 10 superfoods make you healthier. 6 things you can do every day to make you consistently happy. All of this is useful information, and people share it with others to make their friends and colleagues and peers better off, right? In today's day and age, we would often call these things content marketing. Rather than telling people how great we are, instead giving them useful content that introduces them to us, and so they'll want to work with us in the future, right? You might think content marketing is a modern thing. The first example is actually Betty Crocker's cookbook, right? Company Gold Medal Flour had a campaign asking people to submit recipes. People had questions about different recipes. They ended up putting together this book about recipes. Now, recipes aren't selling gold medal flour. Not every recipe in the book has gold medal flour in it, but it's interesting people in certain recipes, which is encouraging them to want to use gold medal flour in the future. And by the way, trust the Betty Crocker brand, which is exactly what people did. Vanguard does something similarly, right? Vanguard sells mutual funds, but they also have an email list where they don't say, hey, our mutual funds are great. No one's interested in a company telling them how great their stuff is. Instead, it's giving away useful information. Here's how to cope with a market correction. Here's ways to reduce financial stress. Here's ways to save money for college. Helpful information that's adjacent to the work that Vanguard does to encourage people to be interested and pay attention to that content, but also to share it. And so we can think about the same thing in our space, right? Sharing videos about how learning happens, or how teachers take their lessons to TikTok, or tools for social emotional learning, right? Again, the more it's about us and how great we are, the less people are going to be interested in listening. But the more we're helping people, the more we're entertaining them or giving them something that educates them, the more interested they're going to be in not only paying attention to that content, but passing it along, right? The less it's about us, the more helpful or interesting it is for them, the more likely they'll be to share it. Okay, so just to wrap up, today we talked about at least, well, not wrap up the whole presentation, but wrap up the steps, and then we're going to go to a couple other things. Just to wrap up the steps briefly, last time we talked about 3 of the steps. We talked about social currency, making people look good. We talked about triggers, top of mind, tip of tongue, how we can make sure people think about us by linking ourselves to the environment, stories or vessels or carriers of information. Then today we talked about 3 of the additional steps. We talked about emotion. When we care, we share, leveraging high arousal emotions to drive people to action. Public, easy to see, easy to imitate, particularly for things that people might not feel comfortable talking about. Surfacing those norms, making them recognize that other people are thinking the same thing, making them feel more comfortable with expressing themselves as well. And practical value is all about useful information. We're going to go to small groups in a second, but just to wrap up this, as applying these ideas, I think of 2 key next steps. The first is figuring out what our kernel is. It's really easy to say we want people to talk about us. We want people to share more word of mouth. But what are we hoping that people will share, right? What is that thing or things that we're hoping they'll pass along, right? What is that thing we want them to share? And then how can we apply the steps around it? Right? How can we find our social currency? How can we figure out our trigger? How can we find high arousal motion, right? Each of these things and identifying them can help us build a vessel or carrier for our information. And so here's what we would like to do in the next few minutes. Someone just put the Contagious workbook into the chat. Feel free to open that up. And then what we're going to do, and given time, I think we should probably have people go straight to small groups. But if it's helpful, maybe take a second to think about what your idea is and what the message is that you want to spread. But then once you've thought about what your idea is and the message that you want to spread, we'd like you to share your idea with others in the group and ask the folks in the group to repeat it back to you. Right? So what did the group say? Did it match? If not, where was the disconnect? How do you think about communicating your idea to an audience? And is it maybe a good way to communicate that idea to the audience? Is it something that resonates? So I think we have about 14 or so minutes left. So I'd suggest the following. Let's take about 7, maybe 10 minutes tops to do this exercise. So someone's going to, I think, hit the breakout function, and all of you are going to be assigned to groups. So take a few minutes in your groups, express your idea, get a sense of what others think about it. I know this is not a lot of time to do this, but it's a good step in the journey. And then we'll reconvene as a large group, and we'll take a couple questions and wrap up. So if someone wants to hit the magic breakout button, we'll see everybody back in a second. All right, so looks like everyone is making their way back. I know we didn't have a lot of time for that exercise, but hopefully at least started you in the right direction. If I might suggest a couple of things in terms of after this session, I think working on that kernel, that key thing that you want people to talk about and share, workshopping a bit with colleagues and others to make sure it's concrete and clear is a great place to start. And then think about how to apply the steps to it, and hopefully that workbook will be useful. I'll also throw, here's a link to it in the chat in case you guys either weren't able to download it or want it for later as well. With the few minutes we have left, let's do 2 things. So first, I'd love to take questions. If there are any questions, please type hand in the chat, and I will encourage you to unmute and ask your question. And the second thing is, if you might take a minute, and if you don't have any questions, feel free to type in the chat either a question that came out of the group exercise for you, or maybe a next step you're thinking about based on some of what we've talked about today, or even something you might have learned from at least a couple of minutes of the exercise we've had so far. So feel free to ask any questions, type hand in the chat, as well as any of the things you might have taken away from today's conversation. Yes, is it Jorge?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, my question is something that came up because I mean we're talking about reproductive health here, and you know when we think about the marketing strategies, you know, just to give you an example, right? Like if Nike came out with a new shoe, right? Just like anybody, if they make a new product, nobody knows about it, you know, they'd want to advertise it so that people know about it. And then they probably want to give some other benefit to it, right? Just like most products or most services. But we were talking about how in the realm that we're in, there's kind of these added barriers to it. And number one is that there's this kind of sexually repressive culture that we deal with where people don't feel comfortable talking about this topic. So that's one barrier. And then two, there's the politics of it, right? There's a lot of misconceptions and stuff out there about what it is that we do. So we have to tackle on those two added barriers. And so, you know, what suggestions would you have? Because I'm sure that, you know, it's not the only topic that has to deal with that. So what else could we do to help tackle those barriers?
So I would say a couple things. First of all, I would say that I have worked with hundreds of organizations and associations, for-profits and nonprofits, and everyone says that their industry is different. And in some ways, you're right. This situation is different. There is not another situation that's identical to this. But people don't have a different psychology for every single situation. They approach most situations with the same head on their shoulders. And so the same ideas, I think, apply. And that's really where I find the steps particularly valuable. It's not about one particular space, products, services, ideas, programs. It's about why people talk and share. Your second point, though, I completely agree that understanding that the barriers is important. And I didn't talk about this today, but actually my most recent book is all about what key barriers are and removing them, right? So the idea of reactance, when we push people, they push back. The idea of distance, when we ask people to do something that's too far from where they are currently, you know, they ignore us because it's the confirmation bias is at work. And so particularly in politicized environments, if something's too far away, they don't move and they ignore it. And so I completely agree with you that barriers are key. And I talk a lot about that in the new book. But I think what you alluded to is, I think, the most important point, which is starting with your audience, right? Starting with the person whose mind you're trying to change, understanding them and what are the needs and wants and values and barriers that are affecting them, and only then can you make change more likely, right? We may have great resources and great information, but if we don't start with them, we're not going to be very effective. Doctors don't start by saying, let me put a cast on your leg. Doctors start by saying, tell me about the problem, and then I can solve it. So sorry, that's a quick answer, but feel free, on my website is more information about the other book and resources related to it. And it gives you sort of a sneak peek and stuff. So certainly check that out as well. I know that we are at time, and so I don't want to keep us over. I know everybody has busy schedules. So thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It was great to get a chance to meet you and at least chat briefly. I hope you find these tools interesting and useful, and they help you along your journey. You guys are doing really powerful and important work, and so I hope these tools help make it even easier to achieve the goals that you want. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonah. And just before we wrap up, I did want to share, we do have some resources on the exchange. And then we also have a link to some of the resources that Jonah was mentioning. And we'll be sending these slides out after this presentation as well. I would highly recommend that the workbook has some of these steps really broken down in a nice way that can make it very applied for thinking about the different messages that you might want to share, and thinking about the different audiences. So, you know, youth audiences, potentially like other stakeholder audiences, like principals or superintendents or leaders in your community, parent audiences, and thinking about how do you craft messages differently for these different groups based on some of these steps and kind of what's most valuable to the folks at those steps. So before, and then I also want to remind folks, we would love to hear. I know in some of the groups that I was able to go into, folks were talking about the marketing strategies they used and what was successful. Please feel free to share those with us on the exchange. If you'd like some more support around this area, you're always welcome to reach out for training and technical assistance at apptta@rti.org, and we'd be happy to work with you on this. And then we'd also love, there's a survey in the chat. We'd love to hear how this webinar was for you and how we can make these events more relevant and helpful for the work that you're doing every day. And so with that, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. And thank you so much for your time and attention today. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you.